What's scarier than a 7 foot tall clown with razor sharp teeth? This Funko Pop. Especially when you walk in the dark and it's like falling off. It's falling off the shelf and it's just laying back there on the floor. Yeah, it's a little scary. I caught me, guys, and you caught me in the middle of a room redesign. I'm almost done back here. Like I said, I had to add a couple of shelves. Had to add a couple of shelves because I was running out of room for books. I've even got like I quit being embarrassed in my paperbacks, and I put some paperbacks up there. But I wanted to take a chance before the movie comes out in a couple of weeks and talk about Stephen King's It. This is an awesome, awesome book that I love to death, and we're going to talk about it right now. George reached, and the clown seized his arm, and George saw the clown's face change. What he saw then was terrible enough to make his worst imaginings of the thing in the cellar look like sweet dreams. What he saw destroyed his sanity in one clawing stroke. "They float," the thing in the drain crooned in a clotted, chuckling voice. It held George's arm in its thick and wormy grip. It pulled George towards that terrible darkness where the water rushed and roared and bellowed as it bore its cargo of storm debris towards the sea. George craned his neck away from that final blackness and began to scream into the rain, to scream mindlessly into the white autumn sky which curved above Derry on that fall day in 1957. His screams were shrill and piercing, and all up and down Witcham Street people came to their windows or boarded out to their porches. "They float," it growled. "They float, Georgie. And when you're down here with me, you'll float too." Hey, what's up, bookworms? My hair is winter fire, January embers, my heart burns there too. For what? For Stephen King's 1986 classic, It. I have said numerous times on this channel before that Dune is my favorite book of all time, but if you're asking for my second favorite book of all time, this is it. This is it. I spoke in great length about why I have become such a big Stephen King fan for my whole life, and I'll put that video right here. I don't feel like I need to just completely rehash that, but I will go ahead and tell you about how this book was my gateway for all things Stephen King. It was the summer of 1990, and I grew up in a very, very strict religious household, let's put it that way. And mother wanted to restrict us from anything that she considered horrific or satanic, as she put it, in any other way. But the 1990 miniseries of It with Tim Curry was coming on to ABC, and she said, "Hey, this is network television. It can't be that bad. Sure, I'll let you boys watch it." And we watched it, and just like I think a lot of other people, I was 12 years old at the time. It was very impressionable on them at that age. I'll talk about the movies at the end of this review. But it left an impression enough for me to become interested in the source material. So it was that summer when no, actually, it was about 2 years later, we moved to Houston, Texas. And I didn't know anybody, obviously. We had an ill member of the family. Mom's sister was very ill, and she wanted to move out here to be closer to her. So I didn't know anybody that summer, and the apartment complex we lived in, you could actually check out books and movies and video games, and one of the books they had was It. So I said, sure, I'm going to go ahead and try this. So basically, long story short, like I said, you'll get the long story in that other video. It took the whole summer because I could only read it after Mom was gone or asleep in bed. So it took me quite a while that summer to get to the story. And then when school started that year, I found out they had almost his entire library at that time, up to 1993. That was when I was a freshman in high school. And I read just about everything he had written. And so basically, it was my gateway to all things Stephen King. And so I don't know if it's necessarily what I think is his greatest writing, per se. It's just my personal favorite book of his of all time. Second favorite book ever. To me, what makes this a special book and his best, in my opinion, is I'm a sucker for a coming-of-age story, and this has 7 of them in it. And anytime you're able to do that, basically, you take the body, which is Stand By Me to you guys who don't read. Take Stand By Me, or the body, and you make the group a little bigger, and you give them all a big scary monster to run from. I think that's really what makes this book so special, is it's just the bond between these 7 friends. and the hell that they go through together. And it's just it's touching in so many ways that you wouldn't expect from a horror story. And I think this is definitely his most iconic horror story. I mean, the box office of the last movie alone should show you that this is a very, very popular story. And I don't know if this is when people became scared of clowns, but I'll just say I don't remember people being too scared of clowns before that. I don't remember being like common knowledge. I don't remember Ronald McDonald becoming scary until the 90s. So we'll get into that a little more. But what I'm going to do first, I'm going to give some non-spoiler thoughts on this book. And then I'll get really into spoilers. This will be a very long review, guys, because I said the only review I think that will ever be longer than this is when I do Dune next year, because it's a very long book. It's about 1,200 pages on hardcover here, and also it's just like I said, I don't think I could be brief talking about this story and how important I feel like it is. The biggest difference to me is that differentiates this from a lot of other King novels. He's written a lot of great villains. I mean, you can think of any of them. You got Carrie, you got Kurt Barlow, you got Jack Torrance, you got many, many great legendary villains. Annie Wilkes, but Pennywise to me stands above all of them as the actual scariest of all of his characters. And I think it's the reason being is that the idea that you can be seeing something and someone standing right next to you cannot see it because of his ability, that's the most horrifying thing to me. Also, a big crazy killer clown with razor sharp teeth. That's pretty terrifying. But the fact that he can take the form also, say you aren't really scared of clowns, he can take the form of anything you're the most scared of. So I mean, that's pretty terrifying in its own right. We'll get into it more in spoilers about why the ending that bothered a lot of people did not bother me, because of a certain phobia that I have. But so first off, you got King's greatest villain, and then you got, like I said, the Losers Clubs, like the kids from the body stuck on a horror story. And unlike a lot of stories that have a big group of friends or something like that, you like every single one of these characters. You root for every single one of these characters. All of them, except save a few, have very difficult home lives. They have very difficult school lives. And being able to be around these friends is what makes their life feel like it's worth living, and that's even before they start getting haunted by Pennywise. So it's very, very, again, coming-of-age story that really touches on a lot of things that all of us have experienced at one point in our life. And I think the biggest difference to me is I read this when I was 15, and I read it again 2 years ago. So the difference reading it, kind of more identifying with the kids the first time, I kind of identified with the adult portion of the book this time. And for those who don't know, it's the book is told kind of in a different order. It starts with the adults, whereas the movie split it up to just the early stuff, and then it's going to do the adult stuff later in the second movie. The book, it's back and forth. It's them as adults, and as they come back to Derry, they're remembering the events, because once you leave Derry, you don't remember anything. So without getting too much into spoilers, I'll say I identified more with the adults this go around. But also, it reawakened some things that maybe, you might have experienced when you were a young kid. Obviously, I don't think many of us had, killer clowns chasing us. And if you did, man, I'm sorry. That's horrific. But yeah, I'm just saying that there's lots of things that you would, when I read it the first time, I was like, okay, I can't really identify too much with like the adult problems, because who's gonna be scared of a big clown when they're out? This clown, I think you would be, but I'm just saying that you have different fears, obviously, when you're an adult than when you're a kid, and I think that this really helped reading it once when I was younger and once when I was older. Do I have to say older? Yes, I have to say older. So anyway, very different experiences there. If I want to talk about my favorite loser for a minute, and like I said, because there's so many relatable characters in this, and I think everyone can find a little bit of their own childhood in each one, in one of these characters at least, if not a little bit in each of them. For me, obviously, Ben Hanscom, that's my most relatable character. I was a fat little kid. I was bullied, and then I got older, and I got thin. I never got quite as good looking or handsome or successful as Ben, but I'm saying that's the one that I was able to relate to the most, because he got picked on, he got called names. Even his good friends called him Haystack, which whole time reading, I'm like, that's not pleasant, you guys. But it became a term of endearment for a while, and I mean, my 4-year-old is a very stout young man. I call him Haystack, because of this book. And I started thinking, is that mean? I don't know. Let me know if you think that's mean. If I should stop calling him Haystack. Figured that was better than saying beep beep Richie to him. But that's definitely the one that I related to the most. I didn't come from a really abusive family or anything like that. I came from a very religious family. So I guess you could say I could somewhat like relate with Stan a little bit there, except it wasn't a Jewish upbringing. It was a Pentecostal upbringing, which I'm not anymore. And if you are, hey, awesome. Good for you. I doubt that you're reading this book or watching this video. But yeah, I'm saying that there's characters in this that everybody can relate to a little bit, even with it taking place in the 50s, and then in the 80s. I know that people who've only watched the movie are only going to know that it takes place in the 80s and then now the present. They feel the need to do that with Stephen. I'll get into all of this at the end. I'm going to talk about the movies at the end, what I like and do not like. But like I said, man, I'm just a sucker for a coming-age story. There's 7 of them in this, and they're all different. There is no carbon copies of characters in this. All 7 losers are very, very different. There's the main villain, obviously Pennywise, and then there's the secondary villains, and that's the Bowers gang. And they're in many ways just as terrifying, if not more dangerous, because there's a line that Pennywise says in the book, you can get them if they believe, half believe, or don't believe at all. You can get them. And that right there, that kind of evened the playing field for me. So yes, this book is very dear to me in so many ways. I think not just from the nostalgia of reading it when I read it. And it was the first book I ever read that size. Before that, I think the Lord of the Rings books were the biggest books I had ever read before this. And, maybe the trilogy might be as thick as this book is. I'm not really sure. But it was kind of like my own coming of age story when it came to reading, because this is when I went from the darkest thing I had read being, The Two Towers, to being it. That was the darkest thing I had read, and that opened the door for me for things like, H.P. Lovecraft and stuff like that. So it opened my eyes to horror overall, and that's why I think Stephen King has been such a constant part of my life, and this book has been something that I was itching to reread when I did. I wanted to reread it again before the 2017 movie came out, and that's why I read it again in 2016. And just, it felt like, you were catching up with some old friends again. It really is that personal of a book. And I think if you kind of just let yourself go and just accept, yes, it's a long book. Yes, it's going to take you a long time to read it. Just accept that's something you're going to do for a while. Don't try to rush through it. If you're an audiobook guy, awesome. I don't do audiobooks, but I know that a lot of my friends who don't care to read a book this long have said that they're picking up the audiobook before Chapter 2 comes out, because they just got to know. So hey, if that's what does it for you, I'm sure the audiobook's probably like 100 hours long, so that might take you a whole summer. I don't know, but whatever works for you, I definitely recommend it. Before I get into spoiler talk, I just want to say that yes, of all the books, if length does not matter to you, this is the one that I definitely would recommend. And then The Stand, easily his 2 longest books, are, in my opinion, his 2 greatest. So there you go. So I'm going to move into spoiler talk now. I'll try to put timestamps in this. So if you guys just want to completely skip over the spoiler talk, that's going to be the bulk of this, because I'm going to go through the whole thing. If you don't want to hear spoiler talk, I'll go ahead and put a timestamp where you can click on a link in the comments here, and you can go skip right down to where I'll start talking about, like my favorite quotes and, in the movies, things like that. The more non-spoiler stuff. But I'm going to get into spoiler talk right now. So if you have not read it and you intend to, or you don't want the movie spoiled for you, I say bookmark this video and come back maybe afterwards and listen to it then. So starting spoiler talk now. Okay, so the narrative flow is between 1957 and 1984. Each member of the Losers Club, they kind of get their haunting experience by Pennywise, the dancing clown. Now, what makes Pennywise so terrifying is that only the person he is haunting at the moment can see him, and sometimes multiple people if he's haunting both of them. So he can be doing something absolutely horrifying to these kids, and only the kids will see it. Adults don't see it at all. So sometimes. I'll get into it. But for the sake of the flow, let's go through each one of the kids. Let's talk about their solitary experience upon meeting Pennywise for the first time. Obviously, George's murder by the storm drain, that is easily, in my opinion, one of the most iconic moments in all of horror literature history. Even people who haven't read this or hadn't seen the movie, they had heard about clowns in the sewers, right? And I'll tell you guys, that messed me up so bad when I read it. To this day, I wouldn't say I'm scared of clowns, but to this day, if I'm walking down the street and I see a surgeon, I'll kind of curve a little bit to walk around it. So, I mean, it left that much of an impression on me that I can't walk past a single storm drain without thinking about this. And yeah, it's just iconic. And I feel like both movie adaptations have actually nailed that part really, really well. Now, I'm not going to say this is the book that made everyone terrified of clowns, but I don't remember too many people with clown phobias before the story, and I think that's where it started. But Georgie's murder, this obviously is what affects his brother Bill, who I guess if you're going to say there is a protagonist to the story, it's Bill. He's kind of looked at as the leader of the Losers Club, and he's the one that King has a habit of writing himself into some of these books in a way. So of course, when Bill grows up to become a novelist, I'll get in that more. I feel like the writer is always going to be the main character in a lot of his stories. But he's also haunted in the form of a photo book of his slain brother. And it has a photo of George in it that winks at him. And, that photo is really horrifying because it was taken just like days before he was killed. And, and it actually, the book comes alive. The photo bites his finger. He sees an apparition of Georgie. So he's just got all this guilt thinking it's his fault because he sent Georgie out in the middle of this rainstorm. He couldn't go with them because he was fighting the flu. And it's stuff that you can see that would probably mess someone up. Then next up we have Eddie. Now Eddie, he has a mother who is overbearing and has led him to believe he is super sick, and it has made him become a germaphobe and a hypochondriac. He thinks, he's scared to death of germs. He thinks everything is going to kill him. So naturally his haunting comes in the form of something super disgusting, like a leper offering to give him a blowjob. Yes, it's you may not think it sounds that scary, but yeah, it's pretty scary. That's scary, and I'm not even a germaphobe, guys. All right? A leper offering to give you a blowjob. Then there's Ben, like I said, my most relatable character. He is a morbidly obese kid, just moved to town. Again, I had just moved to a new Cypress, Texas. I didn't know anybody, so I was relating on that half of it. This was after I'd already slimmed down, though. That summer I had actually slimmed down. But he befriends Bill and Eddie after escaping from the psychotic sociopath Henry Bowers, who was actually using a switchblade to carve his name on Ben's stomach. And he fights back, and they chase him. After he loses them, him, Eddie, and Bill, they kind of bond over building this dam by the Barrens, which kind of becomes the Losers Club unofficial home away from home. And that's where they all kind of meet up when they're away from their families. But Ben is actually haunted by Pennywise as the clown, and he offers Ben a balloon. And Ben, already very smart, thinking like an architect, is actually taken out of the moment. And this is the surprise. I was like, that's what you're thinking of right now? He's weirded out because the balloons are floating against the wind. And I'm like, man, I'm seeing a big, freaky, 7-foot tall clown. I'm not even paying attention to the balloons. But this is where we get the first of the Universal monster appearances. And that may seem odd to some people now, but in the 1950s, man, those monsters were scary as hell to kids. And the Mummy is the shape Pennywise takes before Ben is able to run away. And I think even Stephen King has said in his autobiography that when he saw the Gillman, the creature from the Black Lagoon, it scared the hell out of him as a kid. So again, we might not think this now, but in the 50s, that was scary, scary shit. So there's a lot of Universal monsters in this book. The lone lady in the Losers Club is Beverly Marsh. She is the object of both Bill and Ben's affection. Coming from a home with an abusive father, she encounters Pennywise in another of the most iconic scenes in horror, and that is of the bloody sink. But what makes it even more terrifying to me is that after the event, the entire bathroom is just covered with blood. She screams. Her father comes running in. And he's like, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Sometimes I worry about you a lot," because he can't see anything. So she's risking another beating by her father, maybe worse. And just because he thinks she's acting like a loon, But again, the most terrifying thing is the idea is that you can see something that horrific and no one else can see it. So already you're wondering if you're absolutely crazy and you're being haunted in the worst way. She's hearing the voices of the dead and missing children in her drain pipe. I mean, that's scary shit, man. That's scary. Next up, we have the practical joker of the group, Richie Tozier, a.k.a. Trash Mouth Tozier. His voices in the book, In the book, they're one thing. In the movie, I was kind of like, they're not so great. But again, I'm not sure how you could do this. Taking it out of the 1950s, I think actually hurt the movie. And I know I keep kind of preluding talking about the movie, and so I'm going to talk about the end. He does voices. He's the comedian of the group, and he seems to actually be the one that comes from a good family, with a happy home life. But he gets a visit from Pennywise in the form of the Wolfman, but he writes it off to being exhausted from running from Henry Bowers and his group to bring it up to everyone else when they're confessing their encounters with Pennywise. He saw that I was a teenage wolfman or werewolf or something like that, and that's why he was seeing the Wolfman with a leather jacket that said Tozier on it. Stan probably has the weirdest and maybe scariest passage in this entire book. He encounters Pennywise in the drain pipe, and he holds up this bird because he's bird watching, and he's looking at these. Yes, kids did that in the 50s. They did bird watching. But he has this bird book, and he holds up the bird book because he's so scared, and he recites as many bird names as he can recall. And it sounds kind of dumb, but it makes sense later. At least I thought that it did. But King's writing when Pennywise was coming towards him, it actually made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's scary stuff, just wonderful writing. It's probably the most I've gotten kind of spooked reading any of his books other than the Room 217 chapter in The Shining, which I'm sure most of us know about that one. That will make your skin crawl. And lastly, we have Mike Hanlon. He joins the Losers Club later in the story. He encounters Pennywise in the form of a giant bird, and he has to hide in the remains of the Ironworks explosion that his grandpa was had a nightclub called the Black Spot out there. But that one seemed rather random. And you would think since Stanley was the one interested in bird watching that he would have got the visit from the giant bird. I don't know. Maybe if there's a connection there, I just never really got it. But I feel that one kind of feels like maybe King was out of ideas or out of monsters to use for Mike. Really, his haunting more is with the Bowers family. They like poison his dog. They're racist as hell. They give his father a hard time. So, maybe that was more of his haunting and just coming to terms with being a black man in 1950s lily white Maine. That's pretty terrifying as itself. So when you got 6 white kids who befriend them, that really would change your life, I believe. So these 7 figure out that Pennywise cannot get them as bad when they're together. So, he can only get them that bad when they're alone. So they decide they're going to come together as a group to try to fight him together. But this is where we get the usual message from a lot of King books that monsters aren't nearly as scary as people, and the harm that people do to other people is way, way worse than what these villains can do. And the group has several run-ins with Henry Bowers and Belch and Patrick Hochstetter and that group. Beverly even witnesses the murder of Patrick by Pennywise in the form of thousands of leeches that come out of this fridge that he's keeping animals that he murdered in. So yeah, Pennywise isn't just going after the good people. He's going after any kids. He doesn't really discriminate in that factors. And taking care of a future serial killer, hey, I didn't feel too bad about that one. But I think it's their apocalyptic rock fight, as it's called, at the quarry that is the climax of this arc in the book, in which they finally decide to fight back as a group and win the day, but Bowers does not let it go. When they decide they're going to go down to the sewer and try to confront Pennywise, he follows them with plans to murder them, and Pennywise finds them in the form of Frankenstein, and he kills the other kids in the group. I'm sorry, the other kids in the Bowers gang, not the losers. And Bowers just kind of goes insane after seeing his friends' heads get ripped off in front of him. That's the PG version. Is much, much more descriptive in the book, as are the first mention of the deadlights. The lead up to that is where the book gets super trippy, and this is where it might actually lose some people, especially since it looks like, again, the new movie looks like it might be doing this. They kind of didn't show it. If it happened off screen in the 2017 movie. And what I'm talking about is the Ritual of Chud, as it's called. And this is an ancient ritual, bear with me, an ancient ritual that allows its performers to enter King's macroverse and encounter Maturin, a giant turtle that is the creator of our universe. Got me? And he tells Bill and Richie that the only way to kill it is through a battle of wills. Yeah. So this gets very Lovecraftian. This leads to Bill discovering how the deadlights work, and with the help of Maturin, they send Pennywise back to his slumber. They don't just beat him up like they did in the movie. The Losers Club, they get lost on their way out of the sewers, and then that scene happens. Look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because, look, regardless of this being my second favorite of all time, I still don't think I wrapped my head around what King was thinking here. I'll just leave it at that. It didn't make sense then. It makes even less sense now. But even if you haven't read it, you've heard about that scene, and I'm just not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because I feel like all it does is detract from what I think is a wonderful book. It is a very questionable 30 pages. I do not understand what he was thinking there. I can only blame the drug use at the time. So I'll just leave it there and move along to the losers all swearing to come back regardless of how long and in what situation should Pennywise ever return, which return he does 27 years later in 1984. All the losers, they eventually left Maine except for Mike, and he became the town librarian. So when the child murders start up again, Mike calls each one of the members of the Losers Club, now approaching their 40s, and asks them to keep their promise. And like I said earlier, the twist is once that you leave Derry, you do not remember anything that happened there. It's some kind of supernatural hold that Pennywise has over the town. You know, it makes sense. Why does the National Guard not run up here when there's a murderous clown killing all these kids? It makes sense. Everyone who leaves doesn't remember anything. So once they start coming back to Derry, they all kind of have these flashbacks of their encounters and remember what they're there for. But looking at the older versions of Bev, I just call her Bev. Bev is a clothing designer, and she's in an abusive marriage with a guy who is every bit like her father was. Ben is a very successful architect. He's now super thin and handsome. Bill is a successful horror novelist. Ring a bell. Richie is a wildly successful radio host. Eddie runs a very successful limo service and is actually like driving Al Pacino to the airport. And Stan is a very successful accountant. Each agrees to return, not remembering exactly what they agreed to do, except for Stan, who decides to go upstairs and commit suicide in the bath instead of having to face Pennywise again, writing "it" in blood on the wall for his poor wife to discover. So everyone who left Derry, very successful, yet they none of them had children, but very successful, and except for Bev, it seems like most of them are pretty happy. So the rest, they've had their solitary grown-up encounters with Pennywise again. Bev, she returns home to face her father, finds out he's dead, gets terrorized by Miss Kirsch. Ben gets a visit from it at the library. Eddie sees Belch Huggins in leper form. Richie gets attacked by the Paul Bunyan statue. And Bill tracks down his old bicycle Silver from a pawn shop and remembers how he dealt with his stuttering. He thrusts his fist against a post and says he sees no ghosts. You'll say that for a lot after reading this. So yeah, none of the adult experiences are quite as spooky as the kid versions. That's until they get together at the Chinese restaurant and start to bond again. And I would say the Chinese restaurant scene is the most disgusting yet spectacular moment in the latter half of this book. I had no interest in eating Chinese again for a while after reading this, and I still don't care for fortune cookies. Let's just put it that way. I hope they don't wimp out in that in the new movie. To cap things off, Henry Bowers, he escapes from Juniper Hills, which is the loony bin in Maine, and with the assist from Pennywise, and a ride from Christine. Yes, that Christine. The 1957 Plymouth Fury Christine. He hops on over to the library and attacks and stabs Mike. Mike doesn't die, but he's close to it. He then makes his way to Eddie's hotel room, but he's killed after only breaking Eddie's arm. The one storyline I didn't really care for in this book is Beverly's husband, Tom, and Bill's wife, Audra, following them to Derry. Especially when their capture by Pennywise happens off the page. That's why I'm not really bringing it up, because you could cut this plot point and it really wouldn't change much until the epilogue. Anyhow, with Mike in the hospital, they head to the sewers to confront it for the last time. When they find his lair, they discover its true form is a giant galactic spider. Now, I know this disappointed a lot of people, but if you're like me, and you're fucking terrified of spiders, it was very effective. Eddie, he gets his arm bit off, bleeds to death. He's killed by the spider, and as they attack the monster, then it tries to run away as they're checking on Eddie and saying their goodbyes as he dies. It tries to run away and recover from its wounds, and they're like, no, let's go finish this. The losers follow. They beat the ever-loving shit out of this thing after a quick POV chapter from Pennywise, by the way. And that was an interesting taste. But they beat the ever-loving shit out of him. They rip its heart out, and they crush it, killing him for good. Now, one of the most heartbreaking scenes for me is the aftermath. And that's Mike narrating about how after everyone left Derry again, they began to forget again, including each other. So you have these 5 losers that are left. They have went through 2 hells now together, and they aren't even going to remember one another. Yes, Ben and Beverly leave together, and it's assumed that they end up together. But it was just devastating to me that they're going to forget each other. I mean, these lifelong friends, and they're just going to forget each other again after all this. I mean, they reconnected, and you think, okay, now we can be friends for life, and they're just going to forget each other again. And even Mike says, the writing on the pages that he's trying to remember, it's going to fade over time, and he's not going to remember anything. I mean, to me, it was just absolutely devastating, and it was a much better ending to me than Bill's magic bike ride to wake his wife from her catatonic state. That's just me. And that, Constant Watchers, is the shortest spoiler review of Stephen King's It that I could possibly do. I want to talk about a couple of favorite quotes here, because I actually had to narrow this down to 3. There was about a dozen I wrote down on my second reread of this. Here's a good quote. Maybe there aren't any such friends as good friends or bad friends. Maybe there are just friends. People who stand by you when you're hurt and who help you feel not so lonely. Maybe they're always worth being scared for and hoping for and living for. Maybe worth dying for too, if that's what it has to be. No good friends, no bad friends. Only people you want, need to be with. People who build their houses in your heart. Beautiful, beautiful. And then there's also the very, very famous now. Eddie discovered one of childhood's great truths. Grown-ups are the real monsters, he thought. And I thought I had 3, and I can't find it now. So there are lots of good quotes in here. Obviously, your hair is winter fire, January embers. That's always going to be a good one. I guess now I just want to talk about my hopes. So I guess that's the end of spoilers. I want to talk about my hopes. Or I'm going to talk about the movies that have come out first, and then I'm going to talk about my hopes for It Chapter 2. For the 1990 miniseries, yes, it has aged very, very badly. What I like about it is it kept the times right. I understand they feel the need. After Stranger Things' success, they felt the need to change it to the 80s and present day. I did not like that. I like it taking place in the 50s and then in the 80s. Why? Because technology. You know what doesn't work in horror films? Technology. Oh, nobody can see this? Let me get this picture of this killer clown. I'll be interested to see how they handle that in the new movie. But that's what about the 1990 miniseries I like the most, because it kept technology out of it. It took place in 1957 and 1984. Or actually, I think they moved it up to 1990, didn't they? Yeah, I think they moved it up to 1990 to kind of pull with the when the movie was actually released. But I didn't like them moving it to the 80s. I understand why they did it, because they wanted to capitalize on Stranger Things' success, which in turn capitalized on Stephen King's success. Love it or not, you talk to the Duffer Brothers who did Stranger Things, and they've all said that It was... Actually, they wanted to make It first, before they made Stranger Things. So of all the things that were influential to them, they list It as the number one influence for them for making Stranger Things. So whenever you see It and say, oh, this is kind of looks like Stranger Things, no, guys, reverse it. But when you moved it to the 80s, I can see why it feels like that. But again, the 1990 movie, obviously, Tim Curry is the standout here. I thought all the kid actors were great. Fantastic. The grown-up losers was kind of questionable. That second half of that miniseries was not nearly as good as the first. John Ritter's a legend. I can't think of the actor's name that played Bill, but I actually like him as an actor, but I thought he was awful as Bill. I don't know. The grown-up actors it just didn't feel right. I kind of like Beverly, the older Beverly, but that might just be because she was on Smallville, and I liked her on Smallville later, or she was in one of the Superman movies, or something like that. But yeah, Tim Curry, clearly, that is one of his most iconic performances ever. And I know I keep using iconic, but I'm sorry, this is an iconic story for me and for a lot of people. And I mean, a lot of people will always think of Pennywise as Tim Curry and not Bill Skarsgård. Although I think they're both wonderful, by the way. You're not going to hear me say, "Oh yeah, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that." I was all for them doing a remake. I understood if you couldn't use Tim Curry again. I mean, the man's had a stroke, and I believe he's in a wheelchair at this point. So I was fine. I was fine with them going that way. Let's talk about the 2017 movie now. First up, Bill Skarsgård was wonderful. I was very, very worried he was just going to do a straight Tim Curry impersonation, and I didn't want that. And if I'm being truthful, as wonderful as Tim Curry was, I really feel like Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise is closer to the one in the book. He's not nearly as humorous. He's just balls scary, you know? Whereas Tim Curry kind of seemed like he wanted to be comical and mess with you first because, you know, in the book, Pennywise does say, you know, you taste so much better when you're afraid. So when they're scared, to us, it's like salting your steak first before you eat it, salting your meat. That's what it's like for Pennywise. He likes to be scared because they taste better when they're scared. So, yeah, I think that Bill Skarsgård did a wonderful, wonderful job, and how he's not like the next Joker is beyond me. I thought it was on par with a Heath Ledger type of performance. I really do. I really think that he lost himself in that role to a point to where there's people legit scared of clowns again. You know, and I think that this guy, I actually said I think he'd be a wonderful Lestat if they when they do Vampire Chronicles for Hulu, but that's another video altogether. Especially since Anne Rice hasn't wrote a good book since the '90s. I get distracted easily. The kids, they were fine. Clearly, Beverly was probably the standout in that movie. The kid who played Eddie actually was really, really good. He was good in Shazam also. That kid's got a heck of a future. Very, very good actor. But I don't know. I maybe it was the 1990 movie where I get kind of latched onto those kids as those characters. So it was kind of tough for me there, whereas I was more accepting of Pennywise. For the grown-ups, it looks like they've nailed them for It Chapter 2. I looked at the trailer they had for it where it shows their young version and the older version, and I'm like, it's spot on. I'm a huge James McAvoy fan, so of course I'm going to be all for that, even if I don't think he looks very much like the kid who played Bill. But the rest of them, it looks like grown-up versions of those characters for sure. I guess my hopes really are that we're going to have, since they're doing it out of the narration version in the book, I think that what they're going to do is still have some memories when each one of them gets to Derry of something that happened to them when they were kids that we didn't get in the first one. Because there's a ton of stuff in the book from when they were kids that got left out of the first movie. So originally the cut for It Chapter 2 was 4 hours long, and they whittled it down to 2 hours and 49 minutes. So a lot of people are like, oh man, that's too long. And I'm like, not long enough, you know? So I look forward to the director's cut of this someday. I'm hoping some fan takes this and puts it in the narration version of the book, you know, flipping back and forth between the adults and the kids. That would be a labor of love, but I feel like there's enough Stephen King It fans out there that someone would probably do it. But again, what I'm hoping to see is more of this kid stuff that we didn't get to see in the first movie, and that I know I kind of clowned it, but I hope they don't shy away from the absolute batshit crazy Matra and Turl stuff in the second half. It gets completely Looney Tunes, and I hope it embraces that. And if they are going to do the giant galactic space spider, I hope it looks better than it did in the 1990 miniseries, because, oh my god. I know that was a made-for-TV budget. This first movie was a huge success, so they're going to give them money to make the CGI look great. I'm hoping they don't get overly dependent on the CGI, like in a Peter Jackson's The Hobbit type of way. I feel like when you use it to kind of add on and to support instead of just rely on in a George Lucas way, I feel like it would actually be better. But yeah, it gets really Lovecraftian, and I hope they don't shy away from that, because that would really be what I hope for It Chapter 2. So anyway, guys, have you read it? Are you looking forward to the movie? What did you like about the book? What did you like about the movie? What did you not like about the movie? Did you hate the movie? Did you like the 1990 version better? I'm not going to be mad if you say that. Yeah, I feel like a lot of it's aged poorly, but you know what? I still got it. I still watch it. I still like it. I don't care. I'll wait until the part 2, It Chapter 2 comes out to really judge that as a whole. What I didn't care for in It Chapter 1, like I said, was just the moving it to the 80s. I felt like that took a lot out of it. And it changed so much. Obviously, them not getting the same hauntings. I understand that the Universal monsters aren't really scary to kids in the 80s. Hey, I'm sure the movie rights were probably too much for them to try to do, like maybe Freddy Krueger and Jason. That's what kids were scared of in the '80s, you know. Uh, but I don't know. I don't know. Just being like random weird monster was just kind of would Ben get like an Eggman monster? I don't even understand what some of this was. Stan got haunted by a painting. So it was different. But the thing was, is I felt like it had the same spirit as the book, so I was okay with it. I was okay with most of the changes, unlike that Pet Cemetery remake they did this year that was absolute dog shit. I felt like while this was different, it followed most of the same plot points to a certain point. I didn't really care for uh, Mike in the what do you ever call it, where you kill cattle with and stuff like that, pushing Henry Bowers down the well. Again, but they were little choices. I like the way that they did Henry much better in the book and in the miniseries because I don't know, that was more scary to me than just some mullet kid yelling a lot. I wasn't really Henry in the 2017 movie just seemed like a punk kid who gets popped in the mouth one time and stops. Henry in the novel and in the miniseries is a type that if you pop them back, he's going to stab you in the eyeball. And he's not ever going to forget it. And he's going to poison your family. And he's going to kill your family. It's very, very different. I didn't really care for the Bowers gang at all. The way they killed Patrick Hochstetter in the 2017 movie was absolutely stupid. It was not nearly as effective. I hate that they took out the leeches. They didn't even show Henry killing. Instead of Pennywise, Henry killed the rest of it. If you got the Blu-ray, it has the deleted scenes of where he kills Belch in the car, and it was just dumb. It was just dumb. I didn't care how they did Henry like at all. But again, when you're modernizing, when you're moving it to the 80s, you're moving it 3 decades later. They felt like they needed to do something different. I get that. I don't know. Nah, wasn't for me. So I'm hoping that the part 2 does some things more faithful. If I'm judging just off the trailers alone, just the first teaser trailer where it's Beverly encountering Miss Kirsch, that looks spot on, and that is one of the most uncomfortable and terrifying parts of that book. So if they're really following that this time, hey, I'm hoping they're more faithful with everything and they do not shy away from the absolute kookiness of the second half of this novel. Obviously, that scene isn't going to be in it, and it shouldn't. Man, think of that was controversial in the 80s. Today, that would set the world on fire. Again, guys, this book is absolutely dear to me. So I wanted to talk about it before Chapter 2 comes out. And I'll be doing I've done some videos for, what I've thought about the Chapter 2 trailers, whatever. I'll put that video up here too. So you can check that out if you care to. We've talked about it on the podcast as well. I'll link that. And we're going to be doing a review special on the podcast for It Chapter 2, and where I'll go full spoilers with the book as well, since it won't be a movie for me to spoil things for. So, I can unleash the 30-plus-year-old spoilers finally on the podcast and not feel bad about it because, my podcast host, he's not into horror at all, but he went and saw it just because it felt like an event, and that's what this one feels like. This feels like an event, and that doesn't happen very often for the horror genre. You guys can have this Jordan Peele movie's so scary. Fuck out of here. It's scary. Yeah. If it's not, oh gosh, what's his name? The guy who does The Haunting of Hill House. Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan and James Wan, I feel like, are the best two working horror right now. And if Andres Muschietti actually nails this one, he'll go in there with it for me too. Jordan Peele's not quite there for me. It's just not my brand of horror. Why I like Stephen King is it's uncomfortable horror. It's stuff that makes you squirm. It's stuff that you see coming and you're just grabbing your armchair. I know that once you're past the age of about 12, you can't really get scared by a movie. So that's why I say I like some psychological horror. The stuff that's, I don't care for jump scares. I mean, who does? That isn't scary to me. Yeah, cool, big scary clown. Yeah, cool. If I saw that in real life, yeah, that'd be scary. On the screen, that's scary. But if it's something that you see coming and you just feel like you can't stop it, you're just like this, to me, that's the best type of horror. And I feel like that's what this is going to do. So check it out, guys. If you can do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video, please like it. Please leave a comment. Hit that subscribe button for me. We passed over 650. I think 650 subscribers. I had a goal of 750 by the end of the year. So we got, what is it, August? 4 more months to try to get that goal, so I'm hoping we get there. Check out some of my other videos. I did a breakdown on the Wheel of Time castings that got a lot of attention and a lot of feedback. If you want to hear me talk about some more Stephen King, you're in luck, because next month his long-awaited novel, The Institute, drops, and I will be reading that immediately and re-reviewing it probably within a few days of it being released. It's the most excited I've been for a Stephen King book since 11/22/63. It sounds like a return to form for him. It sounds like a coming-of-age story, which again, I think is right in his wheelhouse and something I've been missing for quite a while. He hasn't really done that in a long time. So I'm super excited. It feels like a throwback. It actually feels a little bit like Firestarter. I don't know. But we'll talk about that. That comes out in like 24 days. Not that I'm counting or anything. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will talk with you soon.